Immigration to the United States during the late 1800s and early 1900s was booming. In 1900, 14% of America's population was foreign born, double the rate 100 years prior. Today, 11% of our population is foreign born, just to give you a little bit of a comparison. Between 1882 and 1914, 20 million immigrants came to the U.S. In the peak year of 1907, 1.3 million immigrants made the journey to America to begin a new life. New York City became the most ethnically diverse city in the world as immigrants coming through Ellis Island began to settle nearby. The European immigrants, known as new immigrants, came from southern, central, and eastern Europe, from countries such as Italy, Russia, Poland, Romania, Spain, Portugal, and Greece, to name a few. Previously, most European immigrants came from northwestern Europe, such as Britain, France, and Ireland. During this time, the U.S. also saw an increase in immigration from Mexico and parts of Asia. So, what were the push factors that caused immigrants to leave home? Failing crops, shortages of land and jobs, rising taxes, and religious and political persecution were the main reasons why so many people left their homeland. In Russia, many Jews faced violent massacres known as pogroms. Another example was a revolution and civil war in Mexico in 1911 that caused many Mexicans to emigrate to the American Southwest. So why come to America? This political cartoon demonstrates the pull factors that brought many immigrants here, and that was the promise of new opportunities, especially for work and religious and political freedom. With the rise in the industrial era, factories needed laborers willing to work for low wages, so immigrants quickly filled that void. In this cartoon, you can see Uncle Sam, right, representing the United States. You see the U.S. Ark of Refuge, and all of these immigrants coming up on our shores. And the sign says free education, free land, free speech, free ballot, right, the right to vote, and free lunch. I'm not sure about the lunch thing, but the others make a lot of sense. This sign here says no oppressive taxes, no expensive kings, no compulsory military service, and no knout or dungeons. So it's the idea that they can escape all of those things, come to America. Here we are, welcoming you with open arms. The title of the cartoon even says welcome to all. And they are escaping, right? You see this gloomy creature in the upper right corner in the sky. That's their past. And they're entering the United States, which is lit up. Definitely painting a very positive view of the United States and of our attitudes towards immigrants. What many people don't know is that a lot of immigrants intended to and did go back home after they made enough money in America to buy land in their home country. So some immigrants came here, made money, and then went back home and stayed there permanently so they can get a new start. And these immigrants were known as birds of passage. New immigrants that came to America faced discrimination and hardship on their journey to forge a new life. So in that previous cartoon, you see this one perspective of this open arms, welcoming to everybody, we want you to come here, it's going to be great type of perspective, which probably exemplifies an immigrant's expectation when they get here. Right? That's the reputation that America has. If you think about the Emma Lazarus poem on the foot of the Statue of Liberty, right? Give me your tired, your poor, huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The idea that America is the place to go, a very welcoming place. But that wasn't always the reality. Many cases, European immigrants were blamed for the poverty and crime that plagued the urban areas that they lived in. And many nativists, which are those that believe that only native-born Americans are worthy of living here, made it difficult for immigrants to find tolerance and acceptance in the U.S. And you even have those that were former immigrants. Right? If you really think about it, unless you are of Native American ancestry, you are an immigrant. Maybe you not personally, but your family at some point was definitely maybe an immigrant that wasn't necessarily planning on coming here, right? Family, ancestry in slavery, etc. But many former immigrants, once they made it in America, they had no tolerance for the new immigrant that was coming in. Their attitudes begin to change, and they're very much hypocritical. If you look at this cartoon, showing a very different point of view, where you have the open arms of Uncle Sam in the previous cartoon, and here you have this gentleman here with his hands up. You know, we don't want you, stop. That's the kind of the message that he's sending. And all of these men with their fancy clothes, their top hats, right, their monocles, they've made it in America, they're wealthy, and they're the ones saying, you know, we don't want immigrants, but their shadows show their story, their personal history, that they were once immigrants. So it's kind of showing the hypocrisy of Americans being anti-immigrant because we're a nation built on immigrants. In addition to European immigration, right, Asian immigration had been on the rise since the mid-1800s. So 250,000 Chinese immigrants were actually recruited by American railroad companies to help build the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, okay, alongside many Irish immigrants. And like many other immigrant groups, Asian immigrants settled in their own ethnic communities. But unfortunately, that isolation led to hostile relations with native-born American citizens, right, or any sort of non-Asian group. So the idea here is that a lot of immigrants coming to America because they don't know the language, they're unfamiliar with the territory, they're unfamiliar with the government, the way things work, they gravitate towards people who speak the same language as them, have the same cultural beliefs, and they form these little ethnic communities. It's not because they don't want to assimilate into American culture, it's just they don't know how yet, but that isolation backfires in many cases because once they don't ever assimilate, or there's never any contact really on a day-to-day basis in a positive way between native-born Americans, white Americans, etc., and these Asian groups, there's definitely conflict there. These cartoons show that negative attitude towards immigrants, right? And up here, upper left, right, you have especially anti-Asian immigrant sentiment there. And because Asian workers were willing to work for such low wages, American labor unions actually fought to keep them from being allowed to work in the U.S., which is, you know, the whole point that they're coming here, because their willingness to be paid less was driving down wages for the other workers. And the U.S. government responded to this pressure by passing the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. And the act banned any Chinese laborer from coming to the U.S. unless you've already established a residence here. So you couldn't come here to work, basically. And this law wasn't repealed until 1943, okay, during the World War II era. Japanese immigrants also faced discrimination. Many Japanese immigrants had settled in Hawaii to work on sugar plantations, and the U.S. annexed Hawaii in 1898, became a U.S. territory, not a state yet, but just a territory. This gave a lot of Japanese individuals the opportunity to try to settle on the mainland. It was a little bit easier to gain access to the U.S. So the U.S. government set up Angel Island in San Francisco as a port of entry for this influx of Asian immigrants. And like other groups, the Japanese were forced to go to separate schools in many cities in California. Okay, so other Asian immigrants, like Korean children, Chinese children, they had to go to separate schools. They didn't allow them to go to mainstream schools in California. And the Japanese government became very angry at this, and it didn't seem to go in line with what the United States stood for in terms of equal opportunity, equal treatment, etc. And at a meeting with President Theodore Roosevelt, the U.S. agreed to stop banning Japanese children from American schools, but in return, Japan would no longer issue passports to Japanese laborers for the same reason that the Chinese had been excluded. And this was called the Gentleman's Agreement of 1907. Okay, it wasn't an official law, it was just an agreement, like a handshake agreement. So the Gentleman's Agreement, along with the Chinese Exclusion Act, were two ways that the United States government officially discriminated against these Asian groups. So in class we're going to be taking a look at Ellis Island, where many European immigrants came through, and Angel Island, where many Asian immigrants came through. And we're going to look at how the experience was different, right? How and why were immigrants coming through Ellis Island treated differently than those coming to Angel Island. So make sure that you write your summary on your Google Doc along with any questions that you have so you can go over them in class. And then make sure you have the definitions and significance of the following terms in your notebook as they relate to what was just discussed. If you haven't done so, be sure to go to the Think questions and try them out by entering in your answers.